Hi, my name is Andrew Prokop. I work at Converge One in the office of the CTO, and today I would like to talk about Breeze. This is a presentation that I've been giving around the country, but due to COVID-19, I'm pretty much housebound, so I'm doing this recording so that I can broadcast it to the world without having to leave the comfort of my home. So let's get going. So the agenda is pretty basic. I want to talk about the platform. I want to talk about Breeze as an ecosystem, spend a little time on launching workflows, dynamic tasks, Breeze as an application server, and then I really want to get into the real guts of this presentation, which are the use cases. These are the different things that I've done with Breeze, other people have done with Breeze. Some of them will be maybe a little bit obvious, but I really want a lot of it to be new and different and kind of the wow factor, like, really? You can do that? And the answer is yes. So let's get going here. So this is a slide that Avaya presents. It's a little out of date, but it's not too bad. But it's overly busy in my opinion. So you see Breeze in the middle and you see all these different snap-ins on top, and snap-ins are Avaya's fancy word for Breeze applications. And then you see a lot of the Aura components below, Session Manager and System Manager and Media Server, and then you see Open APIs, and you see other big platforms like Call Center Elite and Experience Portal. It's kind of a busy slide in my mind. It's not inaccurate, but it really doesn't, I think, convey what Breeze is and how it works. So I've kind of slimmed it down a bit. And there's Breeze. So Breeze in the middle of everything. Now this is meant to be a little bit funny, but not too funny. Breeze is the point where all of these different omni-channel things can come together and form cohesive applications. And so what are these different omni-channel points? Well, telephony. So Avaya, telephone company, known for quality voice communication. So clearly voice is a big part of what Breeze can do and how it can manipulate incoming calls and outgoing calls. It can sit in the middle of a telephone call and add value. WebRTC. WebRTC is kind of the new telephony. It's web real-time communications. If anyone has used something like Avaya Spaces, which is the cloud-based work management program, workflow management program, it's WebRTC based. So it runs on a WebRTC browser like Firefox or Chrome, and it gives you communication through the browser without having to run an application, a plugin of any sort. And then SMS text. So the ability to put Breeze in the middle of a text flow. And I show quite a bit of that later on when I get into some of the use cases. So Breeze can receive text messages and process them, and it can also send text messages. Breeze can also send emails. It cannot receive emails, but it can send emails, and that can be powerful if you're building some sort of notification system. Breeze can interface with databases, so Postgres or SQL databases, and I've done this on a number of different cases where I need to pull data in from like a SQL server and then have the Breeze application act upon that data or put data into that SQL server as well. Where it really gets exciting to me are all the different cloud services. So Breeze has the ability to talk to any RESTful web interface. And this is pretty much the sky's the limit when it comes to that. So any cloud application, whether it be Salesforce or ServiceNow or a lot of different IoT platforms, even things like Twitter, you have the ability to communicate to those platforms through RESTful web services. Breeze also can be the recipient of RESTful web services, and I'll talk about that when I get into some of the use cases. So again, this big ecosystem of different connection points. So I think much more apparent than the previous slide as to what Breeze can do. So I've mentioned snap-ins. Snap-ins are applications that run on a Breeze server. In many ways, they're really workflows. So they are a series of steps. And this is especially apparent when we get into Engagement Designer, which is the drag and drop development tool. but it's a series of steps that you go through to create some kind of a solution. Well, workflows, snap-in/applications, can be launched or started by an incoming call or an outgoing call. Again, the core of Avaya technology is voice. So you receive an incoming call to your contact center and you want to do something. Well, you can put a Breeze application in there and have it do that something. Or with an outgoing call, and I'm actually in the process of building an application that handles an outgoing call and then does a couple of tricks when that call, before the call actually leaves the system. And then SMS text messages. So an incoming text message can launch a workflow, and I've done this in a number of cases where I want to create maybe a text bot or some way of just basically initiating the application on incoming text and reading the text and perhaps responding back. Our work assignment, that's Avaya's attribute routing engine, or custom events. I mentioned earlier that Breeze applications can be launched by RESTful web services. Well, you'd create a custom event that matches that web service, so the outside world can say, here's some data, send it to your Breeze workflow, and your Breeze workflow processes that data. And there are a number of other ways to do it as well. These are kind of the most common. And so if you look at Engagement Designer, again, the drag and drop tool, and you see that little start icon over there, so that's really where everything begins. And that's where you identify what the event is that launches your workflow. And again, I mentioned all the different ways, and there are other things as well. Call intercept. So that's one of the most common ones for telephony. So you intercept an incoming call. And so what you would do is you double click on that start icon, and you'd see over here on the right side, you select how this workflow is launched. In this case, it's a call intercepted, and it's a call intercept from the calling party. And then you set a version number for the event, which is 1.0 at this point. I want to show you also on the left side of the screen, you have all these dynamic tasks for telephony. Now, these aren't used to launch workflows. These are used once a workflow has been launched. So within a workflow, and let's say this is a telephony workflow. So you can do things like forward the call, or you can make new calls, you can drop the call, add participants, set the call-ed party. I'm old school telephony, and we still say call-ed as opposed to called. Set the called party or the call-ed party, set the calling party, get information about the caller, and then this stuff down below at the bottom, call context. So set UUI, so information that user-to-user information that flows with the call that then can be processed by some element outside of Breeze, or maybe even perhaps another Breeze element itself. So that's sort of the telephony stuff. Earlier on, I showed you that Breeze was the center of the universe. Well, that's really incorrect. If you're on an Avaya Aura system, everybody knows that Session Manager is the center of the universe for Avaya. So let's kind of redo what I did before, and let's put Session Manager in the middle where it rightfully belongs. So I have Session Manager here, and I want to show how Breeze would process an incoming call. In this case, I'm going to bring it in from the outside world. So I'm going to bring it in through a SIP trunk. So a call comes in from a SIP trunk, whoever the carrier might be, comes into Session Manager. I haven't shown the the Session Border Controller, but there's most likely a Session Border Controller in the middle there. So it comes into from the outside world, hits the Session Manager, and if you're familiar with SIP, you know that's an invite message. Well, Session Manager allows you to sequence in different components to say that I want this component to see the invite message, and then I want this next component to see the invite message. Well, one of the powers of this model is you can choose who sees what when. So in this case, I want Breeze to actually see this call before anybody else in the Aura world other than Session Manager will see it. So what I can do is I can have Session Manager route the call or route the invite, this is the SIP signaling, up to the Breeze server. Now the Breeze server gets this invite. Notice there's no communication manager here. There's no features, call features. I'm sending it to Breeze. And then Breeze can determine which snap-in, which application needs to see this call, and it can be more than one. And that application can start to run. That application can do all sorts of stuff. For instance, it can start to bring in an Avaya media server. So we can say to the media server, hey, I want you to play this message and then collect these digits. And then it collects the digits and it sends them back to the Breeze server. And then you can do this as much as you want. You can have all sorts of prompts and things, going back and forth. And think of like a little IVR system. But let's just say this is a real simple one. So I send some message off to the media server that says, give me a very simple, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. It allows the user to press 1 or press 2. The media server tells Breeze what was just pressed, and then Breeze maybe can do what it wants to do. It does some processing, maybe it does some data lookup. It can do all sorts of things. But when it's done, it says, okay, I've done as much as I need to do right now. Let me send that invite back to Session Manager. So all this is occurring, again, with call origination. So Breeze is processing, this invite message. Nobody else has seen it. And then when it's happy, it sends it back to Session Manager. Session Manager then says, well, who's next in line? And most likely you are going to have a communication manager. And the communication manager gets that and it starts to process it and it does what it's going to do. And it's eventually going to send that back to the session manager. In this case, I'm imagining I have a SIP phone, and then eventually it rings that SIP phone because all SIP traffic will flow through the session manager. Now, the traffic to and from session manager and communication manager is a little more complicated than this, but for all intents and purposes, this is enough for you to understand. So it sends the call to session manager sends the call to the communication manager, and communication manager sends it back. The thing I want you to make note of is A, Breeze saw this call before anybody else did, any other intelligent element. Breeze got to do all sorts of stuff before anybody else saw it. Also that Breeze can stay in the signaling path. So as this call flows to the endpoint, and the endpoint does other things, maybe make even as simple as just release the call, Breeze can be aware of that and can actually take action on the release of that call. So it can maybe do something a little bit different than simply just let the call hang up. Maybe it sends that call to a post-call survey. Maybe it says, oh, did you really mean to drop this call? Because I realize you're on a cell call because I've done some other things to determine you're on a cell call. Did you mean to drop the call or did the call drop on its own? Maybe I need to call the person back. Any number of things, whatever you might dream up, but the fact that Breeze can stay in the signaling path allows it to do that. For you really geeky people out there, if you were to go into Session Manager and do a trace SM, you can actually watch the calls flow. These invite messages flow from these flow through these different elements, and you see these different phases. But I'm not going to get into that. Just realize that it's there. I mentioned earlier that REST services are one of the things that really excite me about Breeze, the ability to talk to some outside element. And it can be really as simple as dragging this task onto your canvas. This again is Engagement Designer. And then configuring it with any number of different options to what REST service you want to talk to. Is this secure? Do I need to do some sort of authentication? Is this basic authentication, or am I doing OAuth 2 authentication? Do I need to set a message body because this is a post message? Do I need to set different parameters on the URI because this is a GET? The point is that if you want to talk to some web service, cloud service outside of Breeze, you can do it very easily by just configuring this task. It goes out and does what you ask it to do. It sends the message off to whomever you want to send it to. It receives the answer back, and then it gives it to the workflow. So I have a very simple example here. And when I mean simple, I mean very simple. Bitcoin. Bitcoin offers a RESTful web service that is very simple, doesn't require any authentication, so I don't need to be a user, don't need to have a user ID, password. If you just send a GET message to bitapps.com/API/ticker, then what Bitcoin will do is it will return to you the current values of Bitcoin, and it gives it to you in different currencies: euro, US dollars, things like this. I think I ran this a while ago. I have no idea what Bitcoin is now, but so it just brings in information back and it gives it to the workflow. Now, what you see here is a JSON representation, and within the workflow, it's this is just sort of the debug stuff. Within the workflow, it's a little easier to work with, and then you can say, oh, I want to route this call differently because, Bitcoin has fallen below a certain level. Now, would you ever do that? Probably not, but I wanted a very, very simple case to show you how you can get outside of a Breeze application with a RESTful web service. Maybe a more interesting one would be to go out to some IoT device or go out to some system that brought in real-time telemetry information. One of the platforms that I work with is called TWO-CLOUDHAWK, and TWO-CLOUDHAWK is an asset tracking platform. The ability to put sensors inside of trucks, have the trucks drive around the country. You know where the trucks are. You know the state of the truck. Is the motor running? Is the engine on? Is it off? How fast is the truck moving? If it's a refrigerated truck, what's the temperature inside? All this sort of telemetry information. Now that might be more interesting to bring that into a Breeze application and do some specific routing based on the current values that your fleet of trucks is telling you. Perhaps you need to do some emergency calls, you need to do some emergency reroutes, or just the ability to call in and say, where is my shipment, and then have it go out and find the shipment through the IoT system, and then bring that information back into your Breeze application, and then tell the caller, well, your thing is 2 miles outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, and this goes on and on and on with what you can do with the web services. But again, with Engagement Designer and with Breeze, it becomes very simple. And I've talked a bit about these tasks, these things that technically in Breeze world, they're called dynamic tasks. Those are the little widgets that you drag onto your canvas and string together and build an application. So again, these are the telephony widgets or the telephony dynamic tasks. One of the beauties of Breeze, at least from my standpoint, is that with Engagement Designer, it's an open platform. You, meaning a developer, somebody like me, somebody, different organizations can build dynamic tasks, and you can add those into basically the Breeze toolbox. And so to build a task, and I'm not going to get too geeky here, but a task is divided into two halves, the model and the executable. And the model is all the data that's assigned to that task. So if we went back to that RESTful Web Services task, that would be the URI and what sort of authentication. Is this a GET or is this a POST? That kind of stuff. That's the model, the data. And then there's the executable, and that's actually what runs, the stuff that goes out and talks to whatever APIs that the underlying code uses to get outside the Breeze application and do its thing. It's the executable code. There's also metadata attached to that, the image, that's the icon image, and the description of what the data fields are, help files, things like that. But really, it's this combination of the model and the executable. Well, you can build those, and I built lots of them. So, I mean, here's one that I built. And this is really geeky, but there's the execution model, and then also there's associated with this a JSON file that allows you that metadata to define the data within the model. So I won't get any deeper than that. But the thing is then you can create tons and tons of them. And I think I've written about 27 different ones. So I've written these tasks to talk to Avaya Spaces, the CloudHawk IoT system I mentioned before, WebEx Teams, so I can go and create WebEx Teams rooms, and I can add people to the rooms, and I can send messages. IBM Watson for natural language processing and artificial intelligence. I've written a bunch of utilities that I just use for myself. RESTDB, it's a web-based NoSQL cloud database, and so I've written tools, little widgets or dynamic tasks to go out and create databases and pull data from databases and things like that. There's some tools for Amazon and their natural language processing, their AI stuff, a ServiceNow integration, and at the bottom, a generic Internet of Things platform that allows me to have all sorts of different sensors and pull data into my workflows. So again, all written using that model executable and then metadata thing that Avaya opens up. So I'm not here to teach you how to write them. I'm just here to tell you that if you have If you have if you have needs that are not met by Breeze, you can go and meet those needs and build those widgets and then have them, give your users, your high-level developers, the ability to drag those onto a canvas and make things happen. You can also use Breeze as an application server. And this is pretty cool. And I actually do this all the time. As I say, I've got this Breeze server, and it's running IBM WebSphere, and I can run my own applications on it, and I can do all sorts of clever stuff. So I've written a lot of things with web services. So there's the ability to quickly spin up a RESTful web service, write the code for, like in this case, it's a post, and then have it accessible through a URL. So not something you would maybe always want to do, but it's something that I actually do quite a bit of. Is I've got this platform for application development. Why not use it? So I use it in conjunction with not only my traditional Breeze applications, but my kind of supercharged Breeze applications. So let's get going on some use cases. So that's the fundamentals of Breeze, and hopefully that wasn't too geeky, but you know what? I think it's important to understand the fundamentals. But let's look at some of the things you can do with Breeze. Okay, so let's start with use case number 1, and this is my Breeze text bot. So I have a company, Acme Mortgage. Company sends text messages to Acme Mortgage, and the incoming text message launches a Breeze workflow. Remember, I told you that you can launch workflows with text messages. The workflow determines if this is a new or existing conversation, and if you're talking with text, it's kind of hard to know, is this new or is it old? With a phone call, you make a phone call, you talk, you hang up. That's a conversation. With a text message, I send a text message. Well, when does it end? Does it end in 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Does it end when somebody says goodbye? They rarely do. So how does that work? So here I arbitrarily set a limit on a conversation. If I don't get a new message after so many minutes, I say, okay, I'm done with that conversation. Let's start over again, kind of clear out my variables. This is a new question answer period kind of a thing. So I do that. And then once the workflow kicks off, then I use IBM Watson. Remember, I told you I wrote tasks for IBM Watson. So I actually send the text message or the body to IBM Watson for it to figure out what was just said. Watson returns the intent, which is the intention or what's the action that should be taken. And then the workflow responds with the appropriate response, which is really answering the person back with another text message. So it's a text bot. So I can go in and I can say, maybe send a message to a store. What are your hours? And it can come back and say, oh, our hours are from blah, blah, blah. Well, do you sell this? And it can say, yes, I sell this. And then I can say, well, what about my order? And it can say, oh, well, you need to log in. So tell me your credentials. And then it will, maybe do some two-factor authentication. But it keeps answering back and forth. So it's a text bot built with Breeze, using the ability to manage SMS messages and using the ability to reach out to outside services like IBM Watson to do a lot of my natural language processing and really artificial intelligence. So there's a text bot with Breeze. That's as far away as you can get from telephony, but it doesn't violate what Breeze does, because Breeze is this connector to all these different forms of communication. I want to also define something, what a team is. And teams are these new things, these work stream collaboration platforms. And especially with the COVID-19 virus, they are taking off like wildfire. So I use on a daily basis Avaya Spaces. I also have WebEx Teams. I use Microsoft Teams. I play with Slack a little bit, but not so much. I do some with Google Hangouts, but not so much. And then GLIP, like from Ring Central. But they are, again, workstream management. They're not conference bridges. They're not IM platforms. They're not data storage. They're kind of all of those things wrapped into one interface. To me, it's the future of communication. So anyway, I wanted to define that out. So let's go to use case number 2, because I use one of those things. And what I do is I create a bot. In this case, I was doing this with WebEx. So WebEx Teams. So in WebEx Teams, you can identify a bot. And really a bot in WebEx Teams is kind of like an application interface. It isn't any code. It's just the ability for WebEx to say, hey, when something is addressed to this bot, like in this case, I called it OnGuard bot, send a message to this URL. The URL is an application that will then process it and then do whatever it's going to do. In my case, I register my bot, and again, the bot receives all messages addressed to it. My bot, which is written in Breeze, sends that message, whatever the message is that somebody typed in the Teams platform, to a natural language processing system. And again, I used IBM Watson. And in this case, I built a bot revolving around that CloudHawk IoT, the asset tracking system. So I can sit in WebEx Teams and I can ask a question of the bot to go and where's my truck? How fast is my truck moving? Those sorts of things. And the bot processes it, uses the CloudHawk IoT for the telemetry information, and then it sends the message back to the room. Okay? So again, this is actually this is Microsoft Teams here because I wrote the same bot for both platforms. So same sort of thing. I go out to Microsoft Teams. I can say things like, what is the temperature? Notice how I addressed it as OnGuard bot. What direction is the truck headed? And this is natural language processing, so I could say what direction is my vehicle headed, my truck headed, where is my truck going, and it would understand that. And here the vehicle is headed northeast. What's the battery level of my sensor? And where is my truck? And using GPS information and then going out and translating GPS into address information. So that was with Microsoft Teams, but the same thing with WebEx Teams. So the bots are very similar. All these bots are running in Breeze. And the bot itself, in terms of WebEx Teams or Microsoft Teams, is really just a URL. And that URL happens to exist on my Breeze server, which happens to be a whole bunch of code to go out and do what it's going to do and receive the message and respond back. So use case number 3. Let's stick with IoT for just a little bit more. So I have IoT sensors that are monitoring the temperature of a blood supply. Blood can only safely be stored, I think it's from 2 degrees centigrade to 6 degrees centigrade. So if the temperature rises above or below this threshold, I'm monitoring that. My IoT system is monitoring it. The IoT system says, oh, we're in a dangerous situation, launches a Breeze workflow. And my workflow will then, in this case, I used WebEx Teams again. It creates an emergency response team. So it creates the team, it adds members to the team, adds itself to the team, and then it allows the team members to know that there's a problem, talk to the bot if they need to talk to the bot for further assistance, because the bot perhaps has some data because it's talking to the IoT system. And then the bot, in this case, just for demonstration purposes, periodically updates the team with the status of the error condition, and then when error condition is resolved, because it senses that through the IoT system, it then tells the users. So it looks like this. So that really complicated workflow looks pretty darn simple, actually. And here's the case where I'm actually going out and I did, where it creates the emergency response room, adds me, my coworker David Lover, and added the bot to the system. And then it starts reporting the IoT conditions. So it actually tells you why you're there, reports the IoT conditions, and then when the IoT error condition was resolved. And this one I was actually basing on light. Temperature was a little bit harder, but it was easy to do light. So I was shining a light onto a sensor when the value was above 2,000 lux units. It launches the Breeze workflow, and then it stays with the workflow until it falls below, and you can see 462.08, and then it says the error condition has been resolved. So again, Breeze, IoT, Teams applications, team, emergency team management, pretty fancy. Again, for Breeze, for what you might have thought was just a telephony platform. And some of this code, I should say, some of the guts of it is, in order to handle WebEx stuff, is written in Java. You can write Breeze applications in Java or the drag and drop tool, Engagement Designer. So some of this stuff I write in Java because I'm a good Java programmer, and it makes my life a little more interesting. Let's go to use case number 4. And I'm using Google's Dialogflow, which is an AI tool for writing bots. If you know anything about bots, there are intents and entities and dialogues and fulfillment and integration and all that. I won't go all into that. I have some other webinars that talk about that. But I'm using Dialogflow to create a bot. And the Breeze snap-in is declared as my fulfillment engine, which means when the bot actually needs to do something, go talk to something else. And in this case, it's going to go talk to my Breeze server and my Breeze application. And so for designated intents like questions, Breeze is invoked. And then in this case, I used two different things back to my CloudHawk IoT system. And I also did a ticket management system. I used the Converge One on-guard ticketing system so I can pull up tickets, create tickets, and things like that, trouble tickets. And then the Breeze snap-in responds back to Dialogflow. In this case, going through a Google Home device or whatever interface that Dialogflow supports, which is many, many. I did the exact same thing with Alexa as well, so same kind of thing. So inside of Dialogflow, I had to actually point it out to my Breeze server. I wrote this in Java again, so running on the Breeze server, writing it in Java, with given the fact that Breeze can be a web service. And so this is the little test tool, and so I can say talk to OnGuard. That's what I called my bot. And then it came back, and I was just running the test version. I didn't actually publish this to the world, so every Google Home user is using it. And so it would come back, welcome to the Converge One Intelligent Bot. How may I help you? Where's my truck? We're back to that CloudHawk stuff, and it would just speak it back. So, and I've done a number of videos about showing this sort of thing in action. And this is just the test tool that Dialogflow supplies. All right. Case number 5, Salesforce over call routing. And I did this one actually specifically for a customer. Breeze intercepts a call to a VDN. The workflow, the snap-in, interrogates Salesforce for the caller ID. If the caller ID does not exist, which means that there's no record of this caller, I just let the call proceed. If it does exist, then I look to see who is the currently assigned customer, the highest priority customer care team, and I route the call differently. So I'm using Salesforce for call routing. So try and do that with vectors. You can't, but I can do that with Breeze. Use case number 6, text notification system. And I actually built this one in the Avaya CPaaS platform, but it's the same kind of thing. It's Breeze-ish. And this is the ability to have an SMS user register to say, hey, I want to get text updates about something. And it could be an IT system that says, about emergencies, I'm going to register, or it could be even just a trouble ticket. I want to register against a particular trouble ticket. I did this for a golf tournament too, believe it or not, so that you could register for the golf tournament. And then you can send text messages to the system, and the system would send text messages back when people got hole-in-ones and that sort of stuff. So anyway, this whole thing was running in a Breeze / Avaya CPaaS application using text messaging. So again, this was Zang and Avaya CPaaS. And it was as simple as something like this. So I thought that was pretty cool. So building a notification system would determine who needs to be notified. And I kept all that information in an Excel spreadsheet. And then it would go and send the messages to everybody that's registered. Use case number 7, a time-based call blocker. And this time I wanted to use ServiceNow. So I built ServiceNow records, allowed people to have their own call, basically a personal record to say, these are the people that can call me between these hours. If one of these people calls me and it's not between these hours, then I drop the call. Maybe you've got teenage kids at home and you don't want them calling you during work hours. This is kind of mean, but you would then play the message and then drop the call. But other people would be allowed to get in. Or if you have, sort of after hours work type thing and only certain people are allowed to call you. So I built a little ServiceNow application, who the caller was. And I'm using 4-digit dialing, and then I'm using the various times. And then I have a Breeze workflow that goes through and it does the processing. So ServiceNow to basically manage who can call me between what times. So a few quick ones here. This is one I did, which is a frequency-based call router. So when a customer would call in, I would make note of that fact. If the customer would then call in again after a short period of time, I would change the priority, would raise the priority, because it would be I didn't solve this problem. If the customer calls in a third time or fourth time, then I'm really going to raise up the priority. So using Breeze to do some priority management to say if a customer is a repeat caller within a certain amount of time, clearly I'm not solving the problem, and let me raise the priority so the person is not just sitting in a long queue. This is a real live one for a very large retailer who, when you call in, what it does is goes out and it queries and it looks at your last 5 orders. And then it says, oh, are you calling about one of this order or that order, and allows you to then say yes. And then it processes, it routes the call differently, and it also supplies the agent with information about why the caller is calling by looking up the customer's orders. A UUI stuffer, user to user information. So a call can come in. I can then do special stuff, add that information into the UUI of the call. Because in the case I did this for was Contact Center Elite and Vectors. They don't have the ability to make a RESTful web services call. But Breeze does have the ability to make a RESTful web services call. So what I did was the call would come in, it would make the RESTful web services call, gather the data, then put it into the UUI, send the call along. Elite would then, through vector steps, pull the UUI out and do the processing as if it made the RESTful web service call on its own. So really Breeze was the proxy for that. So that was pretty cool. So it's adding using Breeze to add value to traditional Elite contact centers. SMS text to voice call converter had a situation where it was an IoT system where when a sensor would sense an anomaly condition, was sending text messages out to kind of first responders and telling them what the condition was. Well, in this particular hospital, they did not want text messages, they wanted voice calls. Well, this IoT system had no ability to make voice calls. So what happened was the Breeze application intercepted the text message, took the body of the text message and converted that with text to speech into voice, made the call and played that to the caller, so that the caller, so the nurse heard a phone call the information rather than a text message. A few gotchas on this. And this is really important. Breeze does not have access to the audio of the call. And I get this quite often. They say, well, can I build some system where maybe I call in and I speak somebody's name and then they look up the phone number and then they route the call. That speaking the name is audio and it's the media stream. Breeze does not do that. It does signaling, doesn't do the audio. Now the Avaya media server does audio, but it's not really part of the Breeze server, and it's a very complex operation, and you would probably just as soon do it in the media server and not in Breeze itself. Engagement Designer does not provide access to the underlying SIP headers. Engagement Designer is the drag and drop tool, and you might think, well, why would I need them? You probably don't. 99.9% of the time you don't, but there are a couple of times where you need to actually do some custom SIP header management. You need to write that in Java. So Breeze can do it, but you just can't use the drag and drop tool. Use the Java tool to do that, to maybe add a custom header or change a header. And so these are things that I've done as well, again, using Java. Big thing, Breeze is not used for agent functions. You can't make an agent ready, log an agent in, log an agent out, determine the state. It's not that. Breeze does not do that. So it's not part of the platform. Maybe this isn't all that important, but for me, it's for a full multimodal system. It doesn't, a Breeze cannot be launched on incoming email. So it can phone calls, yes. Web service calls, yes. SMS text, yes. Emails, no. So it cannot do that. And then, this may sound funny, but Breeze does not offer any monetization tools, which means if I build an application, I don't have any ability to say, even just me, if I'm a developer, and I want to sell it to the world. But if I'm in a company and I want to do maybe some sort of chargebacks to different departments, I don't have any ability to say, you know, you've run this application, this workflow 1,000 times or whatever I want, or this particular widget, you know, dynamic task, I want to charge back for that. So it doesn't offer any of that as well. So that's pretty much it. I think I get a thank you. Yes. So that is the presentation that I presented this at the Avaya Engage at Phoenix, Arizona. I presented it at some local IUG chapter meetings before everything got shut down. I had several more scheduled. I didn't want this to sit on the back burner, so here it is. This is the recorded version. I hope you appreciate it. I miss seeing people in front of me. I miss questions and answers, but that is the new reality due to COVID-19. So thanks very much for watching, listening. If you have any comments, you know how to find me on my blog. I'm around, so LinkedIn, whatever, Twitter. So take care, stay safe. Bye-bye.